You're listening to Outside the Bubble. I'm your host, Joanna Bull. 2 weeks ago, I was confused. I released an episode and I said it was number 26, and I was wrong. This is episode 26, which means Outside the Bubble is officially a year old. Thank you to everyone who has been on this journey with me. I've learned so much from the podcasting experience itself and from my guests, and I'm just so looking forward to another year. I have great episodes coming up for you. I've been doing some bulk recording, which means recording an episode or two with a guest every day for the past week. And I have some great ones that are queued up, ready to be released. And I'm just so excited about the next year and recording great content. This episode is another inspiration from a conversation, and this conversation was actually on Twitter. I responded to a post from @teacher2teacher who asked how might teas invite students to reflect on their learning, and I posted my answer and said I have lots more to share, and they said we'd love to hear it. So I thought, why not record an episode that was inspired by that. So this episode is 6 ways to engage students in reflection. Some of these reflective activities are solo and some of them are group. And many of them are done through symbols. So humans have always expressed themselves through symbols. Utilizing symbols and images within our reflective activities actually allows for deeper meaning making and evokes emotion in a way that I found that words and writing, speaking alone, just aren't capable of achieving. And I've noticed that learners often engage more readily and share deeply when they're reflecting with some symbols and images. I have used all of these strategies with different types of learners, including adult learners. So any of these can also be applied to professional development. So if you are someone who leads any type of professional development within your school or in your community or at conferences, these are also great activities. They do not need to take a lot of time. However, they can take a lot of time. So you can do most of them in about 10 to 15 minutes if you like. And then there's some add-on pieces that can make them up to 40 minutes, or depending on your class structure. My classes were generally 75 minutes, and you could actually make any of these 75 minutes if you were interested in doing so. So let's get to it. Number 1, a group visual representation. So if students in your class have been involved in collaboration during the year, consider a group visual representation. If your students have not been involved in collaborative activities, so they haven't done much group work, then this is not the right activity. Students do need to know each other in order to make this successful. So the way that it works is in a small group, students draw an icon or a visual representation of some type of their learning experience. It's really helpful if you explain that this is not an art assignment, because there's a lot of stress and anxiety around art and around being judged for our lack of ability to draw. So this is definitely not an art assignment. And you want to give out chart paper and like those fat Crayola markers. And it's next to impossible to even draw well with those fat Crayola markers. So just really even the playing field for everybody. And that helps to ease some of the anxiety. Don't, for this particular task, give too much time, as the purpose is genuine group conversation and reflections. Once the group's finished, have the students share what their creation represents and allow groups to ask questions if needed. Number 2, 6-word story. And this can be done either individually or as a group. So to begin with, introduce the students to Ernest Hemingway's 6-word story, which is for sale, baby shoes, never worn. And this speaks volumes to what can be said in 6 words. So in either a small group or individually, have students create their personal reflective 6-word story. I like doing this activity generally after a specific activity or lesson or assignment to capture learning in a concise and reflective way, but it can also be done at the end of their learning journey in the class with you. And again, this reflection can be personal, it can be shared, or it can even be turned into a poster for the classroom. So consider having students create posters that are quick, so they're not taking a lot of time, of their 6-word stories, and then posting around the class and having the class do a walkabout and a debrief. You can also use the 6-word story, instead of having a poster being made, have students actually write their 6-word story just on a Post-it note and stick it up. And it's great to have everyone walk around and look at them and then ask if there are any of the 6-word stories that resonated with any of the class and have people share them out. And then you can even ask the person that wrote that story to identify themselves and to explain it even deeper. So this strategy doesn't utilize symbols or images, but it does activate deep and critical thinking, as students are asked to reflect in a way that's probably quite novel to them. You can even have students create or groups create 2 6-word stories, one that is positive around their learning and one that is a 6-word story around a challenge that they've experienced in their learning journey. Number 3, why and tell me more interviews. So ask students to bring in a selection of items or images that connect to their learning journey in your class. And then in partners, students decide who's going to be the interviewer and who's going to be the interviewee. As the teacher, set a visible timer for somewhere between 3 and 5 minutes, depending on how much you know your students like to talk. And the interviewer selects one of the items that's out on the table and asks the interviewee to explain how the item represents their learning journey. The interviewee will then explain, and when they stop, the interviewer can only ask one of 2 things, either why or tell me more. And at the end of the timer, the interviewee and the interviewer switch places. So by only asking why or tell me more, the interviewee has to actually dig deep in order to express why this particular item represents their journey, which activates deep thinking. And giving the interviewer only these 2 questions means they cannot ask any inquiry questions, which keeps the interview on the actual interviewee. So oftentimes when we're talking to people, we want to take the conversation in a certain way. So we'll inquire like, well, why did that happen? Or I want to learn more about a particular aspect of what they've said. So I will be directing the conversation. This is an opportunity for the person that's actually being interviewed, so the interviewee, to actually direct the conversation. This is also a great activity as a minds-on before you start something. And I've done it before with students and with adults. And instead of actually asking people to bring something in, just asking them to put out a couple of objects that they have on them. So something that might be in their bag or in their purse or even just in their pocket. And then asking the why or the tell me more. And it's really interesting what comes up for people. Just as a little bit of an aside, I did this activity once in a learning session, and one of the items, the item that the interviewer decided they wanted to learn more about was like my physical Starbucks card. And I don't have the app on my phone. I still have a physical Starbucks card and it has my husband's name on it. And through the questioning, I took the conversation in 3 minutes in this really like deep personal direction about my relationship and why I had the Starbucks card instead of the app and what it meant to my relationship with my husband. And it was really interesting. And at the end of it, I was like, wow, that was a lot of information that I wasn't planning on sharing, but I had the opportunity to take the conversation in that direction. So it's a really interesting technique that goes in a direction that people aren't necessarily expecting. Now, if you are looking for documentation, ask the interviewer to actually write down some notes that the interviewee is saying so that that can be handed in and you'll be able to have a look at that. Number 4 is a postcard story. In this activity, you'll use a variety of images like postcards, which work really well, or you can just use other photo images like magazine cutouts, for example. This is a group collaborative reflection, so give students a selection of images and have the group select 3 to 5 that they agree upon that represent their collective journey in your course. Students can orally or in writing or both share the postcards they've selected and why. If done in writing, consider having the group take a photo of the cards and add it to a Google Doc where they complete the reflection. In this particular activity, it's also great to have the groups go around and share their 3 to 5 visuals and explain why they have selected them. And this pairs nicely with number 5, personal postcard reflection. Select 3 postcards that represent you in the beginning, middle, and end of the course. I've used this reflection in many forms, and I've even used this as a final essay in the grade 10 English course, grade 10 academic English. So students will select 3 postcards, one that represents themselves when they entered the class, one that represents themselves as a learner in the middle of the class, and then one that represents them at the end of the class. This reflection can work really well as a 3-paragraph personal essay, but it can also be done fairly quickly with just a sentence or 2 for each part. And students can write directly on the postcards or again, photograph and upload to Google Docs. And then number 6 is a postcard to your future self. So again, we're using postcards or images here. The postcard to your future self or reflection activity allows students to reflect on their strengths, celebrate what they're proud of within their learning, and plan for the future. So you'll have a bunch of postcards out and then ask the class to pick a postcard that resonates with them. There's always a couple that are really popular, so it helps to have multiples. And then ask them to write about the following 4 things. So a strength they brought to the class or developed during class, an insight from the class they don't want to forget, and this could be a lesson or an activity or an assignment, or a key learning that occurred for them, a commitment to their future self, and why they selected that particular postcards. And then they're actually going to physically write it onto the postcard. This activity can be private just for the student. However, if you'd like to have that info shared so that you're able to get some insight from the students, I suggest writing the questions and posting them around the room on chart paper, for example, and then invite the students to share one thing they wrote on under one of the questions. So I like using chart paper, putting the 4 different questions around the room, and then inviting the students to just add to one sheet of chart paper. They can add to multiple if they like, but some people do actually write quite private reflective pieces. And if they know that there's an opportunity to share and an opportunity to be private, that's really helpful. And you can even hand out sticky notes that the students can write on the sticky and then just go and post it right onto the chart paper. So once everyone's written out their reflective piece, invite them to wander around and read. And for this, I like to set the mood by having relaxing music on, like soft jazz or nature sounds. And then invite students to either share their own reflective piece or one that resonates with them. But the real power from this particular activity comes from receiving your postcards months later when you have forgotten about it. So while the postcards can be mailed without envelopes, consider privacy and have students place their postcard in an envelope. If mailing the postcards are within your budget, have students address the envelopes, and then you could hold on to them and mail them out for a time that makes sense, like a couple months later. So if you're doing this at the end of the school year, consider mailing them out like in the middle of September so that students are back into school, they've been there for a bit, and now they're receiving this note from their past self as a reminder. If you're not able to mail them out, you can hold on to them. And if the students are in the same school, it makes it pretty easy. You can give them out in the new school year at some point. This is also a really great personal or staff activity, so you can actually reflect on your own practice and make a commitment to your future self. Put your postcard into an envelope and address it, and then ask a friend or a coworker or a family member to hold on to it and to send it out in the future. Actually have that person schedule it into their calendar so that they remember. And when it arrives, you will have completely forgotten about it. And it's amazing. They always seem to, the messages when they show up, I've participated in this type of activity a couple of times. And when the postcard actually shows up, it always seems like it's at the exact right time, like exactly the moment that I needed that message and that reminder in my life. So there you have it. There are 6 reflective practices that you can use with your students in your classroom. And in order for you to get started, literally immediately, I have created a free resource for you. You can get the resource at bit.ly/outside-the-bubble-26. And the resource is instructions for all of the 6 strategies that I shared here, as well as formatted images. They're formatted as postcards. There's 4 on a sheet, and I believe there's 28 in total. So you can just print those out and cut them and get started right away. So for that resource with the 6 strategies for the reflection activities with instructions, and there's also some tips that I did not mention in the podcast, and The postcard images that are formatted, go to bit.ly/outside the bubble 26, all lowercase. Thanks so much for spending this time with me today. And if you try any of the strategies, let me know how it goes. Tag me on Twitter @IdeaSmashing. And I'll see you in 2 weeks.